Hi, I'm Gary Berman, host of the Unsung Cyber Hero Adventures podcast. Our mission is to shine the light on the unsung heroes who keep us safe online while at work, home, at school. I'm the Forrest Gump of cybersecurity and the least likely person to be interviewing some of the most important people in cybersecurity. Why? I started a marketing research and consulting company. After 10 years, sold it to a big one, and then it was great. Well, that's when it happened, right under my nose. A trusted insider cloned my company. They spoofed my website, redirected calls, even went to become whistleblowers to my largest client, saying that they should cease all communications with me. After a long battle, I lost everything. But it wasn't just my loss. I had to lay off my whole company, and we closed. I was unable to receive justice due to that attribution. So I realized that being a victim was just exhausting. So I decided to pivot to become an advocate. So I bought a book called Cybersecurity for Dummies, and after 10 pages, I was lost. That's when I realized there had to be a better way to distill complicated information into something that most of us couldn't understand. And coincidentally, after watching Superman, that's when it hit me, superhero comics. My objective became distilling complicated information into superhero comics. That's when the Cyberhero Adventures was born. But where do I get stories? Conferences. Turns out there are a lot of them, so I went to everyone that I could. I began as an attendee, then matriculated to a cybersecurity reporter for Cyber Defense Magazine, and at this year's 2020 Consumer Electronics Show, I had the title of Industry Analyst. I've had the opportunity to listen and learn from some of the smartest people across large enterprise, small businesses, you name it. I've listened and learned from them. And that's how I met Jeff Shaffer. Jeff, tell us about your origin story.
Yeah, hi everyone. Well, I'd say I started getting into cyber and cybersecurity and investigations and forensics with Secret Service. I'm retired from Secret Service, did 25 years there. 17 of those years was in the area of cyber, digital forensics, what they call electronic crimes. Retired in 2015 and have been in the consulting field since then, working first for one of the big four and now with Aon Cyber Solutions, which is formerly Strauss Friedberg. So I manage engagements related to compromise, breach, do proactive services, and business development for Aon Cyber Solutions.
And Strauss Friedberg was a pioneer, you know, in this kind of work before it was a thing, weren't they?
They were one of the first. I think it was 1982 when Ed Strauss and Eric Friedberg started the company, and has grown significantly since then with acquisitions and then being acquired by Aon.
Bob Kardell, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Just to tell you a little bit about my background, I from Nebraska originally, went to law school here, sat for the bar on a Thursday, Friday, and drove to Quantico on Saturday. Started with the FBI back in 1992. I was with the FBI in Chicago working public corruption and cybercrime. I ended up ending my career in Chicago on the Regional Computer Forensics Lab doing cyber forensics for the FBI. I worked cyber forensics for the FBI, then I worked computer forensics for a private firm out of Philadelphia for about a year. And then I changed again and I started working accounting forensics and computer forensics for a large accounting firm. And then I went back to the FBI in 2009. With the FBI, I ended my career managing the white collar crime squad here in Nebraska, managing white collar crime investigations and accounting forensics, and doing some cyber work on that as well. I retired in 2018, and since then I've been practicing law. What I try to do is I'm trying to tell people, try to take all the experiences that I have through the FBI, I'm trying to roll them into a proactive, preventative approach for people. So I like to go out and talk to companies and tell them my experiences and tell them what they can do differently to help prevent those issues from happening there.
Well, you know, you are truly an example of an unsung hero. And one of the many things that I've had the privilege of listening and learning about is that the people who are the defenders, the good people in this ecosystem, who greatly outnumber the bad, they just are humble people. And so on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service to the country. And thanks to you, Jeff, for your work with the Secret Service as well. Hi, Stacy.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So my name is Stacy Shaddon. I am with a firm located in Omaha, Nebraska called McGrath North, and I have been with McGrath North for 10 years now, almost 10 years. I started my career actually in mergers and acquisitions as an M&A attorney, and quickly kind of segued to do a lot of information technology related matters. So both on the M&A side and then agreements and kind of vendor management and analysis. And because of kind of the IT realm, that quickly put me in privacy, cybersecurity matters. 5 or 6 years ago, we really had to start doing deep dives as privacy laws were starting to change and migrate into kind of what they are today. So, you know, that in the more recent years really translated into a lot of work with my clients on getting ready for GDPR and CCPA and a lot of the privacy laws that kind of had been all over the news the last couple years, working through those both from a policy standpoint, from an implementation, and just kind of a commercial governance of an entity standpoint. So that has been my work the last couple years and really what I focus on with my clients.
You know, and one of the amazing things about what you just said is mergers and acquisitions and the attendant risks associated, you know, with cybersecurity. What are you seeing there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I would say the last, especially the last 5 or 6 years, if not the last decade, you're starting to see cybersecurity, especially breach policy, breach response, whether there's ever been a breach. Those are starting to become more of a focus in every deal. You know, they started in deals where they were data heavy, but now you're seeing them in almost every deal. You know, kind of even just basic concepts being built in. A lot of diligence around that, a lot of diligence around security protocols that are in place, not only from a policy standpoint and what entities have in place, but also from, you know, whether or not that, you know, kind of more of the forensic side of the security factor. So it's really become kind of neat and interesting to watch how privacy and cybersecurity has really affected everything.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't there recently a very large, I think it was a telco merger where they were breached and the value of the transaction decreased by, you know, some ridiculous amount?
Yeah, so you've seen, so I think that's right, and you've seen breaches affect large M&A transactions over the last couple of years, whether they've, you know, actually, you know, ended them. That's been the walkway reason. You've seen all sorts of increased reps, warranties, indemnities, holdbacks, all sorts of provisions that are being drafted specific to privacy and security matters.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we're going to talk a lot more about that. Hi, Tom.
Good morning, Gary. Hey, my start in this area occurred probably back in 2000s, and that was in the early Wild West of e-discovery. And we got to probably 2004, 2005, and I realized, look, the big building blocks of a lot of privacy and cybersecurity is the same models as discovery. What you have, where do you keep, who has access to it, disclose. And at that point, started working with multiple clients, but most of the rewarding work is the clients who don't have legal staffs or compliance staffs. And they're either trying to get ahead of the curve, they're in crisis. And that's how my practice began on that side, is dealing with clients on how to get ready and how you deal with.
Well, speaking of dealing with, we have to begin with COVID-19 and the incredible number of online scams. Jeff, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Good place to start as well. So a couple of things obviously from the cyber perspective. It's presents a high value target for threat actors. It's as you look at trends, they're always looking for the low hanging fruit, looking at the best way to get into an environment and compromise it in the fashion that they want, be it a denial of service attack or just looking for lateral movement in order to to get information. I would say that one of the big trends is VPN access. Everyone is working from home. It's going to tax the network, and it's going to again provide an avenue of potential point of compromise for the threat actor. So we're definitely seeing that. And then there's some fraud related to COVID-19 as well, not necessarily cyber related, but there's always a cyber component to anything, and the inflated pricing and thing is selling some of the equipment that's needed. So you'll see that on one side, the fraud aspect, which again will always have a cyber component. But specifically related to cyber, I think VPN is probably the biggest trend we're seeing now as far as trying to compromise and access there.
You know, one of the interesting things in my experience of listening and learning about this is there seems like there's almost this imbalance in the way major corporations and the cybersecurity vendor ecosystem is allocating resources, in that it's kind of the 80-20 rule, where maybe 80 or even 90% of the expenditures regarding defensive postures are focused on the technology stack, you know, where there might be 75 or 100 more different solutions in a large enterprise. But really, you know, maybe 90% of all attacks are caused by simple human error. Tom, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think folks have to realize, with this emphasis on telework now at home, is there are some simple things to look at. You know, we gauge data in and out of a company. Well, that's kind of difficult now because with everyone dialing in. But simple things, checking logs, when are people accessing work? Do you allow people to access work 24/7? And something as basic as who has access to company information remotely. It's looking for those kind of anomalies that can help companies identify any issues they may have. And also maybe something simple as reminding employees, Gary, that if you've got the work laptop at home, the kids can't be playing games on that. That's for work. That's where a lot of the malicious malware may start, is non-work related activities on company computers or laptops.
And Bob, what kind of policies would you recommend, and really how do you enforce these policies now in this rapidly changing environment, you know, pertaining to what Tom just said, you know, and it's no longer, you know, bring your own device. Now your device is it.
Right. Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on a point that Tom just made before I forget about it, it's not only bringing your devices home or bringing the work devices home, but a lot of people are using their personal devices to access work-related network and storage, and those personal devices do not have the same sort of endpoint security that you may have on your work computers. So for instance, our work computers may have Sophos or Carbon Black or something running on them, whereas if you have a laptop at home that you share with the family, you may have McAfee or something else, but you may not have all the endpoint security that you necessarily need to properly access your corporate network. But in answer to your question, it's a great question. How do you enforce it? We've had this discussion with a number of different companies over the past 3 weeks, and the issue is, how do you tell somebody that they have to install a certain software on some equipment that's not doesn't relate to the company? So how do you tell them they have to encrypt their hard drive, for instance, when it's not a company laptop? How do you enforce that? So one of the things that we started advocating, and I think I think it kind of goes to the heart of responding to some of these issues, is if you think about it in not the same terms as an IT response, meaning it's not all an IT issue. So you can do other things like require people as part of an employee agreement to encrypt their hard drive where they can't work from home. You can require them to not share their laptop or use a work-only account on their laptop to access the work-related content, or you just don't let them work from home. And so it becomes more of an employee agreement as rather than just an IT-related function.
Wow, that makes sense. Stacy, you know, data privacy prior to COVID-19 was at the forefront of a lot of people's attention because of testimony from Facebook and Twitter and the GDPR and the California regulations. And you're a subject matter expert on these things. How are people now going to reconcile that perspective prior to COVID-19, and then now with using this exact same technology as a benefit to the world by being able to track the geolocation of cases. How are we going to reconcile that? What will the future look like in that regard?
Yeah, great question, Gary. I think right now people are ignoring that issue and really obviously focus on some of the other economical challenges that are out there. We are seeing though that it's going to become more of a focus. I think there's going to be more of a push in different states other than California here in the US that are really going to dive back into that privacy issue and are really going to expand their privacy rules and pass stronger and harsher, frankly, regulations that look closer to GDPR. GDPR does focus more on the individual rights and the protection of the individual rights, those constitutional rights. And I think you're going to see the U.S. swing even further towards that way. CCPA kind of got us part of the way there, but it is much different than GDPR. They do look different. And so while things are kind of on a hold right now on the privacy front, while people are focusing more on the security piece, I think you're going to see that swing. GDPR has quite a bit of security pieces to it that, for example, CCPA didn't have. And so in the US, I think you're going to see those mesh together more privacy security regulations together, and you're going to see something stronger come out that looks closer to GDPR.
And so for our audience who don't understand the alphabet soup of cybersecurity, can you just say what each of these things are and a little bit about what they entail?
Sure. So GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, they mostly govern EU nations over in Europe, although the definitions there are a little bit broader than that. But it is a set of comprehensive privacy regulations that are really designed to provide individuals rights over their data. So rights, for example, the right to erase requests that your data is erased, the right to request access to your data or copies of your data. It also puts into requirements, certain security requirements that companies that are subject to GDPR have to meet certain minimal thresholds. There's also contractual requirements that vendors who process data on behalf of customers have to have in place. So it really takes anybody, any company or any entity that has access to EU personal data, which personal data really is broad. It can be anything that is identifiable back to a person. And so a very broad definition now over in the EU of personal information. And it really puts around it both these privacy protocols and security protocols between companies who are exchanging this data. Then over in the US, you have kind of really broad privacy rules that float around at the federal level, not really one succinct rule that applies to everybody. And then individual states can pass various privacy rules. Most states don't really have much in place other than kind of breach response rules. California recently, effective January 1st of this year, passed the California Consumer Privacy Act, which it was the first state to pass something that took a step to almost reaching GDPR, but was not as strong and is not as comprehensive of a set of rules. It was passed very quickly. It's hard to follow. There's a lot of errors and kind of missing pieces within it that they're working to clean up. But it is also designed to be privacy rules that provide individuals rights over their data. And so it applies to California residents. Again, you have the right to request your information deleted or the right to request access to your information. And it governs for-profit entities that do business in California and meet a certain minimum revenue threshold.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Tom, what are some of the consequences of non-compliance? Do people have to comply, for example, with the California regulations that were instituted just this past January, given what's going on? Have they issued any stays or any flexibility?
They really haven't, Gary, and the Attorney General of California has recently announced he's going to move forward no enforcement actions until July 1st of this summer. But, I compare here the old discovery days. People didn't want to get prepared, and they thought, look, if I get sued, then I'll deal with it then on how I need to turn over information. These days now, these rules are affecting how you deal with vendors. There are certain compliance requirements. A vendor may require you to be in compliance with CCPA, and if you're not, you may no longer be able to do business. The key little change in the California Act was putting a dollar amount on damages for a breach of California's breach statute, not necessarily the privacy. What that's going to do is allow plaintiff lawyers to bring class action lawsuits for violation of breaches in California. The issue they've had is for a class action is common harm, common damage. With that statutory damage, you're going to see an explosion of breach class action lawsuits based on breaches out in California. So for companies, in addition to that, obviously the Attorney General has powers to issue fines for violation of the California.
Well, there's a big one coming down the pike. The Department of Defense is working on policy right now, CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Protocol that's going to apply to at least the 300,000 suppliers to the Department of Defense to try to first assess and then improve resilience throughout the supply chain. I'll throw that out to anyone who wants to comment on that.
I'll take a quick stab at it. I think it's a great idea, and I think what the government is trying to do is try to make sure that everybody downstream from them has the same sort of security protocols in place that they have. And to a certain extent, NIST has a series of documents in which they purport to set out cybersecurity standards for all those sort of DoD and government contractors, just to make sure that the information that they get is maintained in the same way that the government maintains it, which I think is very important to do. It's, you know, they say in cybersecurity, you're only as strong as your weakest link, and it really becomes true when you start passing your data down to other people. And so I think it's very reasonable and for the government to put these sorts of procedures in place to make sure that they're not giving that information to the wrong person and that they take it seriously. I'll just add, though, I just saw on the news today, and I don't know if you guys saw this as well, but there was a person that contracted with DoD to provide, I don't know how many millions of the N95 masks, and it turns out that it was all just a fraud. They billed the government, and I think it was the Department of Veterans Affairs, $750 million for N95 masks. And so they just were convicted of perpetuating that fraud, and they never had the masks at all. So it's just kind of a good example as to what sort of fraudulent activity is going to take place in this sort of time that we're going through right now, and why the government needs to be concerned about some of those security standards.
Was the payment made?
I don't know whether the payment was made or not. What I did see, though, was that they had charged him with $750 million scam.
Wow. Well, you know, one of the common themes through everything that we discussed so far is the notion of risk. So, Jeff, why don't you talk to us a little bit about risk and risk mitigation through cyber insurance?
Sure. So, although cyber insurance isn't really in my wheelhouse as far as expertise, I've learned a lot since Aon acquired Straws, so I can speak to it at a high level. I would say, to the extent that you can mitigate risk, either transfer it. There's things that you want to do on your own, right? So you look at the risk that you have from a cyber perspective, and things that you can take care of yourself through proactive services and proactive type activity. But those things that you can't take care of yourself, then you can't transfer, then you want to get those services covered. Cyber insurance has come a long way since the beginning days, when it was only really available to the large companies that had lots of money. That certainly has changed now, where small, medium-sized businesses can afford it, and they will customize it for you based on, you don't want the same coverage as, a healthcare company versus a financial institution versus academia. They all have different needs and different things that threat actors are looking for. So they're able to do that now and make it to where it's affordable, and certainly worth it. I think everyone on the panel would probably agree. I'm gonna throw out there that a breach is going to be probably 10 times the amount that you would pay in coverage. I think that's probably pretty accurate. breaches are very expensive, and without that coverage, it can be devastating to the smaller and medium-sized businesses. So I think it's a great idea. I think it's come a long way, which is good for everybody.
You know, one of the interesting things about SMBs, small to medium businesses, is they're incredibly vulnerable to attacks such as ransomware. And the reason they're vulnerable is because they don't think that they have anything worth stealing until they lose it. And they also can't afford the resources, you know, to put up proper defenses, you know, on balance. What advice, Bob, would you give to a small to medium business of what they need to do to be able to protect themselves?
Well, there's a lot that they can do to protect themselves, and it really depends on where they are at right now as to what the next steps will be. But just to your point about thinking that you don't have anything on your network to protect, Jeff and I were just at a conference, sat on a panel together, and one of the business owners in the audience, after the panel was over, I was talking to him about some of his network and what's going on in his network, and he said, "I don't think we have anything to worry about. We're not a target." And it really struck me as naive, I guess, that you think that they're after something on your network. People can go after your computers for a variety of different reasons. And actually, Brian Krebs on his blog gave a really neat graphic as to what all the different uses of a computer are. And so people will attack your network just to take over your computers, to use it to do things like Bitcoin mining, to use it for another botnet, to use it to attack other people. So sometimes they're not after the resources or the information that's on your network, they're just after the resources. And just as a good example of that, I was putting together a virtual machine to help out a friend of mine who wanted to track somebody down. So I got online and I rented a Linux machine, just a virtual Linux machine. I just set the thing up. I went to bed, figured I would get up the next morning and try to configure it, do what I needed to do on it. I woke up the next morning and somebody was pinging that box, trying to break into it every 2 minutes. They were from Kazakhstan, China, Ukraine, somewhere in South America, but they were just continually pinging the box. All
Wow.
they did was they just had a program running to try to identify new machines that are connected to the internet, and then they try to run computer programs against them just to get in. So it really doesn't matter what's on the machine, because this was nothing. This was a bare bone Linux machine. They were trying to hack into it, and I have no doubt they would have found a use for it had they gotten in there. But going back to your original question, it really depends on where they're at with their network security at that point as to what the next steps are that they could take to secure that network. But everyone needs to do it.
So, how are criminals monetizing these hacks? Tom, you know, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, someone encrypts your computer, you know, how do they make money from it?
Gary, I think you put your finger on the first is the ransomware. And we've had occasion to work with a couple cases, and the amount of requesting are remarkably reasonable. And in fact, actually, the folks in the ransomware, there's honor amongst thieves. If you pay a certain amount of money, they'll send encryption. The experience we've had is we've been able to open the computers back up in the network. I did want to go back to one issue on cyber insurance, which you had talked about before I forget, and that is the application process for that, Gary, is very important. Most insurance policies now carve out from regular insurance, so it's not optional. It's a separate rider that you typically have to include. Now, the issue is that application may simply ask, have industry standard policy privacy, and do you follow them? Those are dangerous questions to answer yes or no. And so we'd urge clients to do is to turn narrative in those applications, explain to the providers what policies you have and how you follow them, and then let them set the rates accordingly. You don't want to set yourself up for failure cyber claim by filling out the application incorrectly.
Well, one of the joys of doing podcasting from home is my better half Valerie just called me out for a minute. So Stacy, I'm just going to hand the gavel over to you, and you can direct the team to answer this kind of free-flowing discussion. What's keeping you up at night about the state of cybersecurity? And I'll be back in just a minute.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'll start and then I'll open it up to others to jump in. So what keeps me at night? I think really just the unknown. I mean, the state we're in now with COVID-19 and the economical situation, and the VPN discussion that we had earlier with teleworkers, and just the risks that are increased by everyone's day-to-day activities changing, and that unknown. So when I talk to clients, I think there's a lot of fear and a lot of fear of the unknown, and I think that's really keeping a lot of people up at night. But I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in with maybe what their thoughts are.
Sure, I'll start. Things that keep me up at night, there's several of them, unfortunately. My two big ones, I think, would probably be IoT and mobile. IoT, just because we're adding so many things that are IP based, and as we've seen with the fingerprint from the iPhone and what do you call it, the Nest thermostat, all the new things that come out, the threat actors always look at anything new as a potential point of compromise. So while you're installing it either in your work network or at home thinking, hey, this is great, they're also looking at going, hey, this is great. This is maybe another way I can get in and get lateral access. And then the way everything's kind of moving toward our mobile devices, be it iPads or phones or what have you, and being able to control things that way. Again, another potential point of compromise. And the threat actors have proven time and time again with vehicles and everything else, they're very, very quick to attack these things and either disable them or again use them as a way to get deeper access into your network. So those two things, because we're so quick to glom on to new technology, we want it because it's convenient, it's faster, or what have you. We're so quick to do that and so quick to market with that. Sometimes security oftentimes security is kind of left to do later after the fact.
I'll add to that as well, and I think those are two great answers. But the one extra thing that keeps me awake at night is I think that there's a lot of ingenuity in the new sorts of applications and computer programs that are out there that are coming to market, and a lot of these applications then are built on the connectors with other applications that are out there. And I think what is going on right now is that some of the connectors don't necessarily provide the same security that the underlying application does. So what you end up with is, although the underlying application may be secure and the build-on application may be secure, the connectors in between them might not necessarily be secure. And then what happens is, as these applications go to market, you got applications that build on top of other applications that build on top of other applications. And in between each of those layers is the opportunity to try to hack the security and try to get through it and try to figure out what the data is that's flowing between all of them. And so I think what's going to end up happening is, as they keep building these applications and building on top of each other, I think more and more they're going to find out that they don't completely understand the underlying application or maybe the network or any of the way the packets are streaming back and forth, and they may not really be secure. So that's what keeps me up at night, in addition to all the uncertainty with COVID and the IoT devices. Man, there's so many reasons that I'm up at night. And I'll add to it, we just got a new puppy, so the puppy keeps me awake at night too.
I jump in. What keeps me awake at night is I'm worried about smaller businesses. We've changed the landscape now for regulating privacy and consumer information. The earlier model was consumers turned it over for free services, Facebook, those kinds of things. The kind of regulations now we're trying to flip to a more GDPR model where individual rights with data. That's not how business models are built. And for clients without in-house legal staff, compliance, A, deal with those regulations, and B, just trying to implement them is a real struggle. probably would argue for a call for a more federal type CCP type statute, that you could lay the same rules for everybody. But what I worry about is this increased patchwork regulation and its effect not so much on the big companies, but on the mid-sized to smaller companies, may not be able to survive in trying to meet these regular hurdles.
That's a good point, Tom. In addition to that, the small and medium-sized companies, they may be able to, gather the resources and the funding available to set up and increase the maturity of their security now. But the threat actors are always changing what they're trying to do. So what you set up today to stop the threats of today will be different from what they are 6 months from now. And then they've got to come up with those resources again, and they don't always have that. So they'll build, I hate to say fence because cybersecurity is not a fence, but they'll build those security mechanisms in place for their network now. And then because it's an evolving threat, it has to be updated frequently, and they just don't have the resources to do that. It's very difficult for them to keep addressing what's the next threat and the next threat and the next threat and the next threat. It's a little easier once some things are in place for sure, but it is a recurring cost. A lot of them just can't absorb. It's difficult for them, in addition to the regulations that you mentioned.
Well, thanks a lot. It turns out that we actually had a special guest at the door. So I'd like to introduce him. Hello, everyone. Gary told me that you're having this incredibly interesting conversation. I'm a representative of the unsung heroes, of which you are all members. So thanks for everything that you do. This is the source of my superpower, all these conference badges and things like that, where you have now empowered me even further by the conversations that you're having. And so I have a question. Bob, who's your favorite superhero and why?
Well, okay. That's actually a very easy question for me to answer. It's the Silver Surfer. I used to collect superhero comic books when I was a kid, and Fantastic Four was my favorite. And Silver Surfer first appeared in the Fantastic Four, and so that's who I used to follow all the time. So
cool. Stacy, what about you? Have you been to any Marvel movies this last couple of years?
So I have a 4.5-year-old son, and he has, in the last year, just become obsessed with superheroes. I think Avengers is something that we constantly have playing. We have almost every sword or other weapon item that you could imagine with respect to. I think I have to stay true to Captain America. I think he's always been a favorite. I think my son would probably shake me if I didn't say Captain America, because that's definitely his favorite. So that's a favorite in our house.
And what about you, Tom?
I'd have to go with Spider-Man. You to love the Brown story.
And what did you like about Spider-Man?
The identity. Does he get the girl? Does he not get? And the variety of villains that he faces through.
And how about you, Jeff?
Well, as a kid, it was Batman. But as an adult, I liked the character played by Aquaman. I liked his character.
Well, it's pretty cool because I happened to bump into Gary, and he gave me, one of these comics, the Cyberhero Adventures, Defenders of the Digital Universe. And the thing that I really, liked about it is just, how they brought the villains to life, because it's very uninteresting to think of ones and zeros. So here are a couple characters, Randall, the remote access Trojan, and there's Vernon the virus and things like that. And he told me that he donates everything. So you can go to cyberherocomics.com and hopefully it helps you. You can download them. You can print them yourselves. There's a coloring book for children, which hopefully helps. And so let's go around, and I'd like to the audience to know, how do they get more information from each of you? Jeff, what's your website, or what's the best way that they can get in touch with you to learn more?
Sure. So Aon Cyber Solutions is on the aon.com website. Again, for me, I do proactive services as well as reactive services and independent third-party investigations. So those are the three areas in which I sit.
And Bob, what is your website, or what's the best way for our audience to get in touch with you?
So the best way to get in touch with me is go to our website for Baird Holm. So it's bairdholm.com. On that website, you'll find that there's a list of all the attorneys, and I'm there on that list. It's B. Kardell at bairdholm.com. I'll also just throw out there, we've got a nice COVID-19 hub where we share a lot of information about some of the current threats that are facing the businesses in this current environment.
And how do you spell the name?
So Baird Holm is BAIRDHOLM.com.
Okay, thanks. And Stacy?
Yeah, so you can actually reach Tom and I both through McGrath North's website, so mcgrathnorth.com. And both Tom and I are listed there in our cybersecurity and privacy practice group. You can also email me, shaddon@mcgrathnorth.com.
Well, on behalf of a grateful digital universe, thanks so much for being real life unsung heroes, and stay home, stay healthy.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary.